What's going on, guys? Lon here from Android Authority, and last year's Moto E was arguably one of the best budget smartphones you could buy, and it was pretty incredible what Motorola was able to put together for such a low price. This year they're back at it again with a successor that brings a lot of new features and enhancements, most notably LTE connectivity. But is it still the same bargain of a smartphone as it was last year? Well, that's what we're here to find out with the 2015 Moto E. Motorola has created a very distinct design language for their smartphone lineup, and when looking at the Moto E, there's no mistaking it for anything else other than a Motorola phone. The Moto E features the same rounded corners and sloping curve along the back with Motorola's signature dimple that can be found across the entire Moto lineup. The back is made of a soft touch plastic material, while the outer frame features a ridged texture that goes all the way around, giving the Moto E plenty of grip in the hand. The outer frame can also be easily removed, allowing you to swap in different colors for a little bit of customization, which is something Motorola has become very big about over the last couple of years. I decided to go with this black and blue combo here, and personally I think it looks pretty sleek. What I really love about the Moto E though is its one-handed usability. It's so small and compact that I can easily grip the entire phone from top to bottom in one hand, and I can also easily reach every single corner of the display without having to do even the slightest bit of shuffling in the hand in order to do so. And one-handed usability is one of those things that often gets overlooked quite a bit nowadays, so it's always a really refreshing feeling to be able to use a phone of this size. Going around the device, the power and volume keys are comfortably placed on the right side, which are both very clicky and tactile, and the power button features the same ridged texture that is on the Moto X and the Nexus 6, so it's very easy to locate by feel. Other ports are in their usual places with the headphone jack up top, micro USB port along the bottom, and the entire left side has been kept completely bare. Up front are the usual sensors along with the earpiece/speaker and a newly added front-facing camera. Also on the front is the display, which has received a slight size increase this year from 4.3 to 4.5 inches. The resolution, however, remains the same at 960 by 540, resulting in a slight dip in pixel density, but the difference is most likely negligible. The resolution is fairly low, and yes, if you look close enough, pixels definitely are noticeable, especially when gaming, but for general everyday tasks like reading web pages and keeping up with social media, it was more than adequate. You do lose out on HD video playback, which is probably the biggest drawback to having a non-HD display, but everything else about the display like color saturation, outdoor visibility, and viewing angles are all quite good with very little color shifting when viewing the screen off axis. The internal specs of the Moto E will vary between the LTE and 3G models, but the LTE version is packing a Snapdragon 410 and Adreno 306, whereas the 3G model utilizes a Snapdragon 200 and Adreno 302. Both, however, are clocked at 1.2 GHz and feature the same 1 GB of RAM. For most tasks like navigating through the OS, web browsing, and opening up applications, the Moto E performs without much of a hiccup. Gaming is also possible on the Moto E, although load times can get a little bit long and drop frames will occur from time to time on more intense games. Also, with only 1 GB of RAM, you'll definitely notice some stutters when trying to multitask, and touch responsiveness was also an issue, as I often found myself having to swipe or tap the screen multiple times to do whatever it was that I was trying to do. Besides the inclusion of LTE and the usual slew of connectivity options, the internal storage has also been upgraded to 8 GB, which is double that of last year's model. It's still not a lot, but underneath the removable frame next to the micro SIM slot is a micro SD card slot that will allow up to an additional 32 GB of storage. The earpiece on the front now doubles as a speaker, and it automatically gets points for being on the front, but otherwise it's fairly run-of-the-mill. It's decently loud and produces a clean sound, but since it's just a single driver at the top of the phone, it does sound lopsided, especially when the phone is in landscape. The camera on this year's Moto E for the most part remains unchanged from last year's model. It's still a 5 megapixel sensor and it still lacks an LED flash, but it does feature autofocus this time around. The camera UI is very simple and easy to use, and if you've ever used a Motorola camera before, this will be very familiar territory. Taking a photo is as simple as tapping on the viewfinder, and swiping inwards from the left side will reveal what is mostly basic camera settings, but shooting modes like HDR, panorama, and 720p slow motion video are also available. Picture quality is exactly what you might expect from such a basic camera that didn't receive much of an upgrade. The addition of autofocus is nice, but it doesn't do much to improve the image quality. Color saturation and sharpness is pretty underwhelming, providing for some very muddy looking images. Noise levels are also very high and noticeable in even the most well lit of environments. If this is the only camera you have, it'll certainly get the job done, but I think it's pretty safe to say the camera is the biggest weakness on the Moto E. Selfies are possible now though on the Moto E because of the new front-facing camera, but the quality is VGA, so if you're looking to step up your selfie game, this isn't the phone to do it with. The battery on the Moto E comes in just shy of 2400 mAh, and while this may sound small compared to all the 3000 plus mAh batteries we're seeing in current flagships, it's actually more than enough for the Moto E. The display makes a huge difference here as it draws very little power due to its low resolution, leading to some very high screen on time numbers. Even with a lot of gaming and picture taking, screen on time never dipped below 5.5 hours. On lighter days where my usage consisted of mostly just texting and keeping up with social media, battery life saw upwards of 6.5 hours of screen on time, which was pretty incredible, so a day to a day and a half's worth of battery life was very easily achievable. In software, the Moto E is running what is mostly a stock version of Android 5.0.2 Lollipop, and a near stock experience is something Motorola has committed themselves to over the last couple of years. It's not the latest Android 5.1, but considering Motorola's recent track record with updates, we assume it should get it fairly quickly. To enhance the experience, the Moto E this year brings some of the staple features that can be found on Motorola's flagship, the Moto X. You now have Moto Assist to keep your phone quiet during meetings and when you sleep, Moto Actions to quickly launch the camera by simply twisting your wrist, and Moto Display for those subtle notifications when the screen is off. One thing to be aware of though is since the Moto E has an LCD display, these notifications do not continuously pulsate like on the Moto X, because if they did, it would quickly drain the battery. They do however show up when you pick up the phone and when the notification is initially received. And just in case you're curious, you can't wave your hand over the display to wake it like on the Moto X, because the Moto E does not feature any IR sensors on the front. When it comes down to it, the best part about the Moto E is the price. It's extremely affordable with the LTE version coming in at $149.99, and that's without a contract. If you want to save an extra 30 bucks, there's also a 3G version available for $119.99, but it is definitely worth the extra 30 bucks for the LTE connectivity, as it makes the overall experience on the Moto E that much better. All in all, I've really enjoyed using the Moto E, and when you put everything into perspective, it's another very solid entry-level phone for Motorola. It's small, compact, lightweight, and for a smartphone with 4G LTE, Android 5.0 Lollipop, and a sub $200 price, the Moto E is one bargain of a smartphone. Motorola is proving once again how dominant they can be in this price range, and that you can get a lot in a smartphone while paying very little. As always guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up down below. We definitely appreciate that. And also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And if you want to see more content, make sure to click the videos over here on the side. And don't forget to check out the website for more in-depth coverage, AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.